in terms of the connections and things, I wanted to look at just some specific cases, because as we think about really trying to do the construction drawings and just really add the detail to them to really illustrate how this thing's going to get put together, or some of the houses get put together, there's all these little things that come up about, like, oh, you know, it's easy enough to kind of get the main structural elements in place, but a lot of the fine-grained connections are really sort of hard to do. So I just want to show you some tricks about how to work with some of those things and think about some of the workarounds so that we can try and get our model as accurate as possible. And to play around with this, what actually I did was I opened up the Jansen House. So thank you, Jansen House modeling team. It's a great one to work with. And let me go ahead and open up that model. It's actually yours off your the Dropbox site. And I'm just kind of padding around in there and really starting to look at some of the different connections and starting to see how you put the model together and to think about really how we can start to improve on it a little bit, just in terms of making all the connections and illustrating some of those different things. And as we're going through and putting structural elements in there, as we're putting the beams and the columns together, the issue of how things all connect together really gets to be, you know, there's a lot of precision that you can get into in terms of really making that look right. Now, some of the things that are actually looking pretty good, you guys have done a pretty good job in terms of actually, for all these sloped columns, what the connection details are at the end in terms of the bases and the tops being horizontal. You know, there's ways of sort of going through and constructing all that. Like, for example, this one over here, you have the top being horizontal, which is nice. Okay, the base cut style being vertical, and that's actually a pretty accurate model for what's going on. Oh, for this one here, this one caught my eye just because I could sort of see the intersection of the post with the beam that's on top of it. So different sort of things that you can do. One thing I just want to kind of let you know, in the same sense that we can connect walls to roofs and attach like you know beams to walls and things like that, you can go ahead and choose that column and then attach its top or base. Let me show you that. I can say attach its top or base, and then even go through and choose, for example, that beam, and it'll kind of chop it off and do the right thing in terms of what's going on here. Now, the truth is, actually, as this thing gets put together, what's really going to happen here, just from a construction standpoint, since that's a 4x4 column, and this is like a 2x element here, chances are what we're really going to have happen is at the top of the 2x, right there, you can almost sort of see the intersection there, that we'll have a double up. We'll have two 2x14s or something like that, just so things bear nicely. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be that way, but that would be sort of a better transfer. But again, that gets to sort of the fine points of how the construction details are put together. So just kind of watch out for that a little bit in terms of as your posts and beams and things come together. Oh, just how they actually do connect. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other things that I'm seeing going on here, because we just want to, this is all about at the starting point, just going ahead and connecting things together. For example, let me come on down, I'll take a look at that one right now. Looks like we got a little bit of a gap there. So let's kind of stop to think about that. Okay, so let me even orbit this around a little bit. And I'll pan that up a little. Let me zoom that out. I just have the hardest time panning with my little mouse here. What I try to do is just hold down on the mouse button, hold down on the wheel, and do it that way, but sometimes I don't always have good luck with that. So in any case, here's what's going on. This is the one that sort of caught my eye. It's this sort of gap between those two different beam ends. So let me kind of tell you a little bit about that. As you're going through and you're working with walls and connecting walls together, one thing you may have noticed is that if you have walls that kind of come together in a complex way, it doesn't always do a very good job of joining the walls. And there's a tool specifically to help us clean that up. It's called the wall join tool. And we can choose the connection between two different walls, and it'll rotate through some different variations on how those things might butt together, whether this one butts over that one butts over this one, or whether they're mitered together. And we have that same sort of capability for beams, and sometimes we need to use that to clean up the beams. The beam join tool, it turns out, is right above the top of the wall join, beam and column joins. And if you choose that tool, you'll actually see, it's a little hard to see right here. Let me kind of zoom on out a little, see if I can kind of show that to you a little bit better. There's actually these little blue arrows that show up. In fact, let me go ahead and rotate the whole thing over to the top. Maybe you'll be able to see it better there. There's little blue arrows that are showing up. Okay, and these little blue arrows are really giving us the notion of we got these beams coming together, and we can think about really what the order is, what the hierarchy of how they come together. So for example, if I take that little blue widget, which is for that beam over there, and I extend it, okay, that one will dominate. If I take this one, that one will dominate. So what you can do is when you have things that are sort of coming together, but not quite coming together, for example, here's another one that doesn't quite come together, I can try extending them, okay, and that'll butt that way, or I can extend it, that'll butt that way. That's kind of interesting in terms of what's going on. I might have to look at that and sort of see if they're rotated in some distance or just how those are actually connected. But generally what will happen is by going through and playing with those two things, you'll get sort of a better connection. Let's see if I can find another one in here. Again, looks like that one joins pretty nicely that way in terms of the vertical one dominating the horizontal one. That one has a little gap to it, though, and let me kind of see if I can figure out why that is. It kind of hit escape, so I'll get out of that. Take a look at that. And I'm just taking a look over there. I'm not seeing what's happening right offhand, but I'm going to show you a trick that may sort of help us with that a little bit. That has to do with how beams join and how they all come together. So let me go rotating out to 3D. Okay. In particular, this house is sort of really interesting to me in terms of how the beams and the all the framing elements come together, because you got some really tough connections. That, for example, is a really tough connection, and I applaud you guys for really actually doing a good job of modeling this beam. This beam's actually kind of a hard one over here, this one that's out here, in that you had to do a little rotation on it. We had to rotate it around its center and kind of cant it out about 15 degrees, and that's pretty difficult in terms of doing that. Over here we have kind of that squared in like post or a beam that's coming into that kind of one that's coming at a funny angle. Let's see, we have a lot of those funny conditions, especially on this one just because you have all those sloping surfaces. Okay, so in terms of thinking about how to model those, and those do get to be a little bit difficult to model in terms of coming in, there's really a fantastic tool that we use to clean up connections like that. And let me see if I can find another one. I was sort of playing around with one. Here's one right here. Same sort of thing over here. Let me edit. I'm going to sort of start by just editing sort of the issue of which one's dominant. Let me go ahead and make that one dominant. And I'll escape to get back out of that. But now I have this issue of like all these little ones that come into it are like stopping short. They're not quite going far enough. So let's talk about how we can go through and fix that, because it's kind of a good general principle. If I choose this one over here, most of you have probably discovered there's this thing called an end extension. There's either a start or an end extension. It really depends on which way you drew it, whether you drew it from the outside in or if you're going from the inside of the building out. And I know this one happens to be a start extension, so I'll put like a 1 foot in there and apply that, and you'll see it's going to like just extend beyond. And yeah, it's not quite right, but at least they're intersecting each other. That's the starting point. Maybe I can make that a little shorter just so it's not so far. Oh, like only 4 inches or something like that. Okay. But they still got this bad intersection that's not looking good. So here's what we got to do in those cases. There's this funny notion of what you can do to beams, and we typically think about it relative to steel beams, but it also works for the wooden beams too, and it's this thing called coping. And what coping is all about is basically handling the intersection between two different framing elements. You'll find that Revit's actually, it's pretty dumb about when you have two framing elements and they sort of get close to intersecting. As soon as they get sort of close, as soon as any part of them intersects, it'll stop. It'll hold them back because it tries to avoid an overlap. And coping lets us sort of say, okay, no, we actually want them to come together and come together a little more closely. So coping is up here again under the modify tools. How you get to it is if you just choose the beam, you'll sort of start getting this sort of modification tools, and there's coping. You can either apply it or remove it. I'm going to start by applying it. What it's going to ask it is first choose the element to be coped. That's the one that's going to be somehow cut back or sort of shaped by the other element. And then we're going to go through and choose the element that is going to be doing the shaping. So in our case, I'm going to grab this one. That's the one that's going to be coped. That's the one that's going to be cut back. Okay. The second thing, and it says, gives me a prompt down here at the bottom, pick the select the column or framing with which to cut. I'm going to choose that one, and it'll do that. And that's not too bad. It's at least, it seems to have picked up the shape. It's not really the length we want just yet, but it's at least sort of heading in the right direction. Okay. If you go through and choose that, you'll see that actually coping has a parameter that controls it too, and it's right there. There's something called the coping distance. So 1 inch, it's currently holding it off 1 inch. Typically that's because in steel, something like that, we actually hold things off a little bit. We sort of conform to the shape, but we hold them back so we have a little bit of wiggle room when things are assembled in place. We'll have some sort of brackets or something that'll actually join them together, but we often hold back a little. Now, 1 foot's probably a little bit much for what we want for wood. However, if you go through and say, oh, but I want my wood to just join right up against the other piece. I don't want there to be any gap between them. If you put a 0 in there and you say apply, okay, look what happens. It sort of got the end right, but it didn't do a very good job of handling the intersection there. Okay, so that's not quite right either. So somewhere between 0 and 1, we're going to do something that actually makes some sense. And this is going to kind of call back or recall sort of how a lot of things in Revit work. If you think about how coping and how it's going to work, it's really going to make some sort of a void that's going to cut off the end of that beam. And like a lot of things in Revit, Revit doesn't like things that are 0 width. Okay, it just doesn't really like those. You'll find that when we're adjusting doors or windows, if I want no frame, I can't put in 0 because that would make an invalid piece of geometry. What you can do, though, is put in something really, really small, like 1/32 of an inch. Okay, and that'll actually work. So with coping, go ahead and think about this in terms of you can't quite put 0 in there. You can put a very small distance in there. So for example, let's do that to the other beam that's kind of just next one down the line here. Here's this one. I'm first going to go through, actually let me try let me try coping it without extending it. Let's see if that'll work. I'm just sort of curious if it will. Let me say cope it. I'm going to cope this one against that one. Looks like that actually didn't do very much for us. So what I have to do is first go ahead, actually it did. Actually, I'm not sure if you can see, it's got a little teeny bit down there at the bottom where it's kind of, that little corner at the bottom got dog-eared. Let me go ahead and put the start connection, or actually the start extension. In this case, it might be the end extension. It looks like you might have modeled those in the other order. Let me put 1/0 in there. Okay, that's coping. Okay, so it looks like it's doing the voiding and cutting, right? So let me now go through and say not 1 inch. Let me say 0, 0. Let's even try a 64th. I'm going to see how close we can actually get that and still get a valid piece of geometry. Okay, even a 64th will work. I bet it'll even work like 128. It just can't be 0. So kind of watch out for that. Okay, and really, as we go through and start connecting all these different pieces together, that's going to be a big piece of it. Is really, it's all this thing about the beam joins and the hierarchy of what's going to be the dominant one, and followed up with this coping to try and just trim the geometry so that when the things interact, they interact a little bit nicely. Let's see what's going on over here. That's that. Actually, I'm sort of curious about how you guys did this. The side rail is actually pretty cool in terms of being cut off on the side. So I'm not sure if you edited the profile or what you did there, but let me see if I can do the same beam join sort of thing here. It looks like that actually is done a little bit different. It looks like, yeah, they're framing elements, but they're done a little bit differently. So I was going to see if I could sort of change the hierarchy of all that stuff, but not to worry. We'll go ahead and kind of keep on playing around with different things. So let me pause there for a minute and just see if we can sort of take questions about beams and joining and all that kind of stuff. Oh, it's modeled as an in-place component. Oh, very good. Okay, that makes sense in terms of what's going on. So you actually sort of drew something and have an extrusion to kind of pull it all back. Fantastic. So then even on this one, the whole question is there, oh, let me go in here and I'll try just pulling back on that little blue dot a little. Either kind of have to pull that back, or you know, like everything, you have to decide which one's going to be dominant. Get it to kind of just really come right together. And the cool thing about doing this is, like, you probably never thought so carefully about it, but it really is hard to sort of figure out the exact order of how they're built. Yes, go ahead, Mary Lou. Okay, when you're trying to join the floor joists on the corner, they taper and connect. The floor joists connect on the corner. Let me think about that. Yeah. Describe that a little bit more. When you say they, can you show me a place where that happens? Or like, yeah, you have a model I can open up and take a look? Okay. Sure. So go ahead and like, which one's yours, Isaac? Okay, Fitzpatrick, let me go ahead and open your latest model, and you can see, let's see if you can steer me towards a corner where that's actually happening. So I'm going to go back over to Fitzpatrick. Well, I got one. I got kind of an older one that's like 327. Is that the latest one, or is it going to show me in there? Or? Either that or you can steer me towards one. So go ahead and just tell me where you want to be heading. So actually, my chat's kind of frozen right now there. I don't know if you're typing anymore. Let me see if there's anything kind of happening over here. Nope. Still Fitzpatrick House. It's okay. It's fine. Use the 327. Great. Okay, let me open it up, and then you can like steer me towards where we need to go. Do I need to go down to like some sort of foundation framing plan or something like that? I'll say user interface or general. I'll make myself IWayK so I can do that. I'll open up Fitzpatrick again. It's a little bit complainy, but that's okay. We'll see how it's going to work. And where was I? I was up the second floor, top of slab. Let me sort of turn on the wireframe. And then go ahead and turn on fine or something like that. Okay, let's see if this is going to work any better. Let me try this one more thing. And this is just sort of this whole thing about collaborating. And the problem is because you are local, but that's okay. I'm going to basically, I'm going to check out all your things. This is going to be called checking them out at risk. And that's because I can't communicate with a central server right now. But since I'm not going to save back, we should actually be okay. So not necessarily a smart thing to do all the time, but it'll help us illustrate the point. Well, that should be fine. What are you complaining about now? I thought I got you all out. Hang on. I'm owner. I'm borrowing. Open in all views. That's fine. User created. Hang on just a second. As with you, you'll notice that sometimes I fight a bit with Revit. Actually, if this really continues to fight me, I'm going to do, I think, what Isaac suggested, which is going to be, I will save this away, detaching it from central, which is kind of a way of, it's not a good thing to do if you want to kind of keep on working with it, but it'll let me keep on working. Okay. In this case, I was trying to change a view property, so it wouldn't let me change that. Okay, so back over here in the corner. This is the issue, right over here, where you're trying to get those to come together. So let's think about that. Okay, so in that same sense, we should be able to go through and do the whole thing about the beam joins. So let me kind of think about what happens. If I bring that out, okay, that's more of a mitered corner. Do you want a miter or do you not want a miter? Or do you want them to come together kind of butted against each other? No miter. Well, let's see what we can do about this. Create or remove a miter lock. Kind of a good question. One of the things that I don't do all that often. Let's see if we can kind of figure out how to get rid of the miter. Because you don't want that. Let's see if we can figure out what the properties are of this thing. That's kind of a good question, because here you are. Let me just try something here, because, yeah, this is kind of a new one on me in terms of trying to figure out how to make that work. I'm going to try stretching it further first. That's just going to like let it butt out that way. Bring it back to here. Or even over here, kind of pull that one out. Let me try those beam joins again. Let's see if we have any choices. That's interesting. Let me try that one. I'm trying to figure out the right hierarchy of all these things. Kind of interesting that it's not showing me a bunch of stuff, and could be just sort of a graphical error. Looks like we're showing it on those sides, but not on this side. That is kind of weird. Why does it not think there's a join there? Not to worry. Let's kind of keep on going. I'm going to hold that one back. Actually, what I should comment on is actually, this is really the end. That's just sort of the extension, but that's considered the analytical end. So that little blue dot right there is really where it considers the end of that thing to be. So let's see if we can sort of build this up. Let me unjoin those and see if we can bring them back together again. Okay, those two really are joined together. That one's right there. Let's see if we can sort of make this work. Unjoin those elements. I'd like to do it kind of completely automatically, but you know, when it doesn't work completely automatically, I'm not above trying to force it. Okay, those things should be joined. Let's see if we can get to the beam joins again. Okay, so let me have that one dominate. Now, why does it always do the miter? Because I always like to think about them. What is going on here? I'm just trying to think about depth clipping. Aaron took forever and drew everything as an in-place comment and not have the problem. Well, that that would seem to work. I'm just trying to figure out if there's got to be some way. There's got to be some way of turning off this miter thing. That's a miter lock. Show beam joins containing that. I'm just trying to think about this in terms of how to do that, because I know you don't want it to be a miter. That's mitering. That's holding that one back. That's mitering. Why does it always come up as a miter? That's kind of interesting, because it's weird. When we did the other beams and stuff like that, it didn't come up as miters. So I got to think that's some sort of property of the join. What I'm playing around, just so you sort of get a sense of what I'm thinking in my own brain about this, is I'm trying to come up with some way to actually sort of adjust the, just choose the join itself. And I'm not seeing a good way to do that right offhand. Let me just try, as a general principle, if you don't mind hanging on for just a second. I think so. That's probably a good way. Let me, yeah, if you want to, so we can kind of keep going for other folks, let's, yes, I will think about this and see if we can come up with a way to get rid of that miter, because you know there's always some way. It's just some property of the connection. So let me go ahead and do that. Yeah, I don't want to waste everyone's time as I try and struggle with that one little thing. But yeah, I know it's going to be something about the property of that join. So let's see if we can figure that one out. How about any other ones? I'm sorry I don't have the answer for the miter right offhand, but I am certain we'll come up with something. It's always a matter of kind of fighting with Revit, and eventually we'll come up with it. Any other kind of random sort of framing questions? No worries. We're hanging because, yeah, what I'll do next, see what else comes up as questions. Yeah, if we're running out of stuff on the framing, we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the other things, like just putting the wood framing in the walls and how to control what things are viewed at different times, so we can start creating these construction docs. When I was looking back over here in terms of mitering, I could see how to miter things. In fact, so just to kind of follow up on that thread, what I did see kind of in the mitering, just kind of heading in the right direction, just so we started to see what's going on. There's definitely this issue with the mitering where if the two different beams are the same size, same family, all that type stuff, it'll try to miter them by default. Yeah, what we're going to basically figure out is how to turn those off by going back to square off joins as opposed to miter joins. But again, we'll go back to that. see if we can come up with a nice crisp answer for you there.